Welcome again to the Mullen Automotive Museum in beautiful Oxnard, California. I'm Rick Eberst. I've been a docent here for about 10 years, and we're going to continue looking at some of our cars in depth for our YouTube channel. What we have here today is the 1929 Bugatti Type 4344, and to help walk us through this car is one of our longtime docents, Larry Crane, who is an interesting guy. I really enjoy that he's here. He's a well-known author, race car driver, and published many articles, very voluminous history of publication. And he's also a faculty member at the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. So we're really thrilled to have you here today and to help us go in depth with this beautiful Bugatti. So welcome. Glad you're
Bugatti started early. As 17 years old, he was trained as a sculptor with his brother Rembrandt. And he knew quickly he was never going to be a sculptor like his brother was, at the quality level of his brother. So he apprenticed himself to a small bicycle firm called Pernetti and Stucchi. And in their catalog, they had a tricycle, which was a working tool. It was like a pickup truck with pedals. When he was 18, he decided he would try to put a motor, a Dédion Bouton single-cylinder motor, on the back of a tricycle. It was stable, it was light, the power to weight ratio made it a racing car. And he won his first hill climb. And legend has it, he made a number of victories with that lightweight, high-speed vehicle before he put a second engine on it. And then he really went fast. Probably scared his mother. And Bugatti was thinking along the same lines as Henry Ford. He wanted to do volume, lightweight, inexpensive cars. You can't do the kinds of cars he was doing inexpensively. But the people that he wanted to sell to found him. Bugatti realized it was the power to weight ratio that was winning the races. And in his interviews, he said, "I do not make racing cars. I make production cars. If my owners choose to race them, I'm happy for the awards that they're winning." He made a long series of engines based on a single design, four-cylinder, three-valve cast iron block. It's a monoblock, which means there was no head separate. So there was no valve gasket or head gaskets that could fail in competition. He built what was called the Type 35. He entered it in the French Grand Prix at Lyon. The Type 35B was a different animal altogether. It was extremely powerful. It was 120 horsepower in 1926. Since customers were already asking for sports car versions of the Grand Prix cars, simply having lights and fenders, cycle fenders on them, Jean Bugatti and his father decided they would stretch that same elegant form. The Type 35 Bugatti is arguably one of the most beautiful racing cars ever created in proportion in its final shape. In its stretched form, they put the Type 43 was a full Grand Prix 120 horsepower supercharged engine. They put the same two seats that they would have had in a Grand Prix car, stretched the chassis 22 inches, put a fairly large, a wide second seat and a third seat in the tail. The 22 inches added 750 pounds to the car. Albert Devaux had left Talbot and joined Bugatti to run the Targa Florio in a factory-sponsored Bugatti racing car, a Type 35B. He won the Targa Florio in 1928. So immediately he said, listen, we might as well put a nice body on this car and make it a comfortable sports car. Mm-hmm. So he took it off to a coach builder in Paris to have it rebodied and put it up for sale. A Paris dealer took the car to sell it. This is the car that we have. It disappeared in the automotive world through several owners. Still a beautiful roadster, still with its Type 35B engine. This is a very noisy, radical 6,000 RPM engine that produced its horsepower between 4,000 and 5,000 revs. It was not a useful touring sports car. It was just a little bit too radical. One of the last owners was a doctor in Paris. Bought the car. There was never a Bugatti called a Type 43, 44. It was a Type 43 with an engine change. It would do things that the Type 35 would make you deaf, for one thing. This is the car that Peter Mullen found. The Type 44 engine in this car makes it a very useful, civilized touring sports car. Peter and Merle Mullen used this car for a rally before they purchased it. And I'm guessing it's beautiful and it's comfortable. It's relatively quiet and a perfectly civilized sports car for a classic rally. Hard to imagine this being a 1929 car.
Wow, Larry, that was a really great story. Thank you so much for sharing all those great details about the history of Bugatti Company and also about this car and how it came about. I wonder if you could answer some questions for me and maybe talk a little bit more about the body on this car, because it's so very special.
It's a double story, because DeVoe wanted it to be a sports car, a civilized sports car. So they put the 3-liter engine in it. And when the new body was made, it carries a line down the fender line and the sweep, where the running board goes into the rear fender. The Type 55 over here, this is a Jean Bugatti's signature line. Mm-hmm. He was as good a designer as many of the designers in Paris, mm-hmm. and he was a son of Ettore. Mm-hmm. This car has a fabulous Jean Bugatti-esque character. They built a car that was almost a Type 43A. It's like a coach-built one-off Type 43A. The 43A had an American form. Mm-hmm. It looked like a Model A. This tail with a rumble seat. Mm.
I noticed there's a little bit of a curve down here too. Some of the cars were straight across here. I noticed that's on the 43A also, maybe a little bit deeper.
I think that this was meant to be a roadster full time, mm-hmm. with an optional roof if it rains. But this whole line from the cowl across the fender and into the rear of the car, mm-hmm. this is a Jean Bugatti finished piece.
Mm-hmm. So the top easy to put up, you think?
It is designed as a roadster, mm-hmm. not as a closed car.
Larry, I noticed this car has a rumble seat.
It does. The roof has to be up, it looks like, before the rumble seat opens. I've never seen it open. Mm-hmm. The top, I think, is a very, very simple enclosure. Mm-hmm. Rainproofing, more or less. There are no side curtains or a place to put side curtains, so it is a roadster with a possible top. And if the top is up, then you can have a second seat.
I see.
And that passenger gets to see the rain as well.
Well, it's like have to have this more of an umbrella than it is a top.
This is more of a folding umbrella.
Good. I noticed that this has the Bugatti racing wheels and tires on it. Can you tell us a little bit about the aluminum wheels?
Should we look over here?
Oh, sure, yeah.
The brake drum is part of the wheel. And it has a steel liner. These are more than spokes. These are actually fan blades. If you look at the way they're mounted, this line, this curve is right on the rim. This one is 4 or 5 millimeters back. That's a fan blade. So obviously, if this wheel is on the other side, the fan blade is moving the air the other direction. The main thing it does is move air. Mm-hmm.
Would it be more sense for this part down here to be out this way, so as you went forward, it catch the air here, or you're saying it's a fan?
It'd go either way.
It'd go either way.
It's just enough of an angle that it will move air.
Mm-hmm. And what about this is the center knockoff? I noticed there's a wire on that. What's that all about?
This aluminum oil cap, or grease cap, has been lost all over Europe. There are various ways to do this. Most of them considerably less sophisticated or beautiful than this one is. Mm-hmm. This piece of safety wire is invisible to the naked eye. Mm-hmm. Usually there's rubber bands or other kind of things that were done on the road. This is beautifully accomplished, but this cap is safe.
Yeah. So that's just basically to hold the cap for the grease fitting on
grease
there.
Fitting,
cool.
or grease opening, yeah. Right.
Now, were these cars with the knockoff in there, was that an efficient thing to have when you were racing? Was that easier than?
Yes. It not only allows you to replace the worn out tire, but you get a new brake drum at the same time.
Right.
Bugatti brakes, first of all, they're extraordinarily good. I drove a Type 51 in the mountains, in the Rockies, and the brakes are extraordinary. You can't imagine them being cables and laced chains to operate what they're doing.
Larry, could you tell us a little bit more about the suspension on this car and what the special elements are that might relate to Bugatti and that history?
One of the things that the American customer will recognize is a semi-elliptic spring. American cars had a long semi-elliptic spring, which is a stack of spring leaves. Bugatti cut that in half. This is a very stiff suspension.
And I can see there's a Bugatti label right here. That's
everywhere.
Everywhere.
Bugatti's machine screws in early days all had an EB on the end of the machine screws were square. They were not hex nuts. They were square nuts. And they had EB on the head of the screw. Those are priceless to find.
And the exhaust pipe, oh my God, it looks like a jet engine exhaust.
I think you can climb in there and adjust the valve.
Larry, maybe we could go up and look at the front of the car and you could tell us a little bit about the suspension. I understand some interesting ways that axle was made.
Amazing. Yes, indeed. The axle, it's a tubular axle. It didn't begin life as that. This axle was done as a straight beam, forged, with two boxes at 45 degrees in the forging. While it was still in a straight line, it was bored to make it hollow. And then it was reheated and bent into the form you see, and in the bending, the boxes became the spring shackles.
Did anyone else do that kind of format?
No.
Of course not.
No.
And what's the value of having the front semi-elliptical springs come through those boxes?
Everything in this car is designing failure out of this equation. Everything about, a Bugattis that ran in 1929, 6,000 RPM, the crankshaft was on ball bearings and roller bearings. Failure was not an option.
Larry, I noticed the wheels on all these Bugattis, they're hot, they stick out more at the top than they do at the bottom. What's that all about?
That's camber. In modern cars, the camber is usually the other way. It's for grip at the contact point. It makes a very light, positive steering.
So it keeps that, what they call the tar pad or patch?
That patch.
That patch, right. Good.
Right.
And then right sticking out of the front, we have this other very obvious piece. Could you tell us about that?
It's two things in one case. It's called a dynamat. It's a generator and a starter motor. There's a switch on the dash that tells this whether it's going to be a generator or a starter motor. Now, I was told when I have driven a couple of these cars, make sure you make that selection while the car is running. If you don't, it's a big challenge to get it back to where you need it to be. And most classic cars that came with hand cranks were converted to this. These are all over the Mullen Museum because they were well-maintained cars that were used regularly, and it gives you an electric starter when they weren't available as early as this car was made.
So this is why we have a starting checklist for all our cars, because you got to know all the steps and when to do it.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, Larry, it's an exciting day here at the Mullen Museum because we're able to open the hood on this beautiful Type 43, 44 and see the engine. So maybe you could walk us through the engine a little bit.
This was an update from a very high-performance engine to a slightly less performance engine that's much more civilized. This is a Bugatti 3-liter straight 8 made up of two 1.5-liter iron blocks. You can see the drive for the camshaft is up the center. This is an iron block, and that's an iron block. It gave them a 3-liter engine in a relatively small space. What it gives you, it only had 80 horsepower compared to 120 horsepower in the Grand Prix car. But it had torque at 2,000 or 3,000 RPM that the Grand Prix car just, to get there was a noisy undertaking. This is not. This is a very civilized 3-liter touring car, basically.
And I notice on the side here, there's these 8 circular units with 4 holes in them with some brass bolts underneath them. That's really interesting. Could you explain that to us?
This is also a Bugatti clever idea. All Bugatti single cam engines have this. This device, this thing, is simply a cap or a plug. You have a tool with 4 little tabs in it that unscrews this, and that gives you access to put a feeler gauge in to check the valve lash. The valves are in the monoblock. So to change the valves, you have to pull the engine apart and take the valves out the bottom.
Well, we have another great treat for you today. We've been able to open the interior of the car, open the door, and I'm seated here, of course, on the right-hand side, and I'd like to walk you through the dash a little bit. Of course, we have this beautiful steering wheel, very classic Bugatti. You might notice there is no horn button here. That happens to be over here on the left, right underneath the dash. Starting all the way on the left over here, we have a gorgeous clock. There's next a fuel gauge, a speedometer, tachometer here. This is a light, your dash lights, because the lights don't have lights behind them. You also have an overdrive unit up here that you use in 4th gear to put it into overdrive. Then you have a fuel gauge. Next to it, you might not be able to see it. It's a beautiful little clear plastic lever. That is actually your turn signals. And so left for left, of course, and right for right. This is your advanced and retard, which you go up and down to adjust the advanced and retard on the ignition. Another small unit over here, a little button that pulls in and out, that is actually your choke. And on the far right, you can see that there is a fuel gauge, and then there's also the ignition switch and starter. You actually put your key in there, and then to engage the starter, you push in on the key. Now over here is the 5-speed or the 4-speed transmission with the reverse. Reverse is all the way over and back this way. You have the parking brake or e-brake, which can also be used when you're racing. And of course the beautiful mirror on the inside. I would also say that the steering column is quite long, sticks out this way. Probably would not be accepted today with the safety standards that we have, but very functional, very beautiful, and works very well. If you can see the floorboard down here, you can see there is a brake and a clutch, and this is the accelerator pedal. It's just basically a lever with some ball bearing rollers on it. So when you push it in, the ball bearings rolls and pivots on the end of the shaft. Very compact, very functional, and beautifully done with the engine turning up here on the aluminum dash. Well, Larry, thank you so very much for coming in and sharing the day with us and giving us all your good expertise on the engine, the background, the history of the 43, 44. Well, thank you again for joining us at the Mullen Automotive Museum here. We certainly hope that you'll be able to come to the museum sometime soon and partake in our tours that we have for you. We also invite you to join us on MullenAutomotiveMuseum.com, where you can actually take a digital tour of a lot of our cars. We have several more cars we're in the process of producing for our event for our Instagram channel, and we have a lot more planned for the future. So we do hope that you'll be able to join us. We hope you've enjoyed these shows. And if there's a car that you particularly like to hear more about, please let us know, send us an email, and we'll see if we can work it in for you. So thanks again for coming. It's been a great pleasure to have you here, and we'll see you again sometime soon. Thanks again.
Mr. Mullen has spent decades assembling his collection of Art Deco period automobiles. Many of the cars in the collection are one of a kind, and many more are one of a few ever built. Wouldn't it be great if you could have one of these automobiles in your collection? Well, you can, in miniature form. We have a fine selection of museum cars available in 1/43rd and 1/18th scales. The 1/18th scale models include a number plaque. Pictured are the Delahaye 135 in two-tone blue and one of the museum's 3 145 shown in both scales, as well as the famous Bugatti Type 57 Atlantic, of which there are only 3 originals. Also our incredible Dubonnet Xenia, which has been seen in exhibits around the world. There are both of the Vauxhall Sport models. There are only 2 originals, and both are in the museum's collection. And last but not least, one of Mr. Mullen's personal favorites, the Talbot Lago Teardrop. All of these wonderful models are available in our museum store at MullenAutomotiveMuseum.com. Don't wait, many of these models are limited editions and are in short supply.